The night I asked my parents for $4,600 to save my leg. My father pointed through the kitchen window at a restored Airstream worth nearly $22,000 and said, "The money was gone 3 months earlier." He had quietly given the company I helped build to my younger brother. 9 months later, he would offer all of it back in exchange for 2 lies and my signature. My name is Lena Mercer. I was 37 that September, standing at the end of my parents' kitchen table with one hand wrapped around a cane. My left leg felt hot from the inside, as if someone had buried a coal beneath the scar. The incision had begun to swell, and every step sent a deep ache through the bone. Dr. Harper had called it a revision surgery. She needed to remove the infected hardware, clean out damaged tissue, replace the rod, and start intravenous antibiotics. She wanted it done within 2 weeks. The hospital would not hold the operating room date until I paid the estimated patient responsibility, $4,600. I had written everything down because numbers were the only way I knew to ask for help without sounding helpless. I offered to repay $500 a month. Beginning in November, I added 6% interest. I would hand over the title to my pickup as collateral. I even brought a printed payment schedule and a pen. "I'm not asking you to give it to me," I said. "I'm asking you to buy me time." My father, Graham, did not look at the paper. He looked through the window above the sink. The Airstream sat under the security light, polished aluminum shining through a thin layer of September dust. My parents had bought it a few weeks earlier. It had new tires, walnut cabinets, and blue-striped cushions my mother had chosen from a catalog. Inside, Donna had hung a small wooden sign that read, "Mercer Retirement Road." The trailer had never left the yard. "Money's already committed," Dad said. I did not say it cruelly. That almost made it worse. He said it the way a bank manager might explain that the doors had closed 5 minutes earlier. My mother folded the dish towel in her hands. "You're 37, Lena," she said. "Adults are supposed to have emergency savings. I was hurt in our shop." Her eyes moved toward my cane, then away. "Maybe having to solve this yourself will finally teach you that your father cannot fix everything." Rachel was on speakerphone from Columbus. She had been half listening while unloading groceries. When I repeated what the doctor had said, she gave a tired little sigh. "Doctors always lead with the worst-case scenario," she said. "They want patients to take things seriously. The infection is in the bone. You'll find a way, Lena. You always do." In our family, that sentence had always been offered as praise. I was the dependable one, the daughter who stayed late, read the fine print, remembered birthdays, and knew which supplier could deliver before Monday. That night, the words sounded different. "You always find a way" meant no one else had to help. I thanked them for hearing me out, gathered my papers, and walked toward the side door. Headlights swept across the kitchen wall. Noah backed his truck beside mine. The bed looked strangely empty. He climbed out holding a white bank envelope. "There's $800, he said. "I sold the compressor, the 2 grinders, and that old apprentice tool set." Those tools had followed him from his first year in the shop. "Noah, take it back." He stepped beyond my reach, knowing I could not move quickly with the cane. "The claim will come through," he said. "This just gets you there." He still believed the number Dad had given me belonged to a real workers' compensation claim. I knew it did not. I said nothing. I was not ready to break my brother's picture of our father. Even while mine was already cracking, at the time, I still believed silence was kindness, and that protecting him might somehow protect what remained of us. When Noah handed me that envelope, Neither of us knew he had signed papers 3 months earlier, making him the company's sole owner. But someone in that family knew exactly what had happened. Mercer Steel and Stair began in 1972 when my grandfather, Walter Mercer, rented a cinder-block building and took his first stair job with a borrowed truck and a second-hand welder. By then, the shop had 14 employees and a reputation for industrial stairs, guardrails, mezzanine frames, and secondary steel. I started going there before I was tall enough to see over the layout table. I swept the office, sorted bolts, and carried coffee to men who called me Graham's little girl. By 20, I had earned my welding qualification. Later, I became a certified welding inspector, quality manager, and senior estimator. I was not the family mascot. I wrote the bids, reviewed shop drawings, approved inspection records, and understood the code well enough to know when a shortcut was not a shortcut at all. Behind the layout bench, my grandfather had started a wall of bend test coupons. Every welder who passed a qualification test had a sample nailed there, tagged with a name and date. My father liked to walk customers along that wall. When he reached the section filled with my tags, he would tap the steel. "Steel doesn't bend for a last name," he would say. For years, I believed that was the greatest compliment he could give me. The accident happened in March of 2025. We were moving a heavy steel stair assembly with an electric hoist that traveled along an overhead rail. The system had been troublesome for months. During 2 safety inspections, I had documented the same problems. The load chain was wearing unevenly, the upper limit switch had been bypassed before, and the stop bracket at the end of the rail had a visible crack. Dad signed both inspection sheets. Beside each one, he wrote the same sentence: "Repair during next slowdown." The shop never slowed down. That Thursday morning, one of our fabricators lifted the stair assembly while I stood beside the fitting table checking dimensions. The hoist jerked near the end of the rail. The load did not drop straight down. It swung sideways. I saw the stair coming, but there was nowhere to move. The lower stringer drove my left leg against the edge of the table. The pain did not arrive immediately. First came the sound, then a white silence. When I looked down, I knew the tibia was broken before anyone said it. The bone had come through the skin. Someone hit the emergency stop. Someone else called 911. My father crossed the shop faster than I had seen him move in years. He dropped to his knees, pulled off his jacket, and folded it beneath my head. He held my hand so tightly my fingers went numb. "Stay with me, Lena," he kept saying. "Look at me. Stay with me." Then, while we waited for the ambulance, his voice changed. "Don't mention the limit switch yet," he said. "We don't know whether it had anything to do with this." It did not sound like a conspiracy. It sounded like instinct, the reflex of a man trying to control consequences before he understood them. At the hospital, I told the intake nurse the injury had happened at work. Dad spoke with billing and said Mercer Steel was completing the first report of injury. He said the workers' compensation claim number would follow and asked them not to create a second filing because duplicate reports could cause delays. I believed him. That night, surgeons cleaned the wound, placed a metal rod through my tibia, and started antibiotics. Dad stayed beside my bed until morning. He brought water, adjusted the blanket, and answered calls from the shop in the hallway. 4 days after I went home, he gave me a reference number made of letters and digits. "That's the claim," he said. "Keep it somewhere safe." I saved it in my phone and wrote on my kitchen calendar. Claim filed, Dad handled it. He also cleared a long bench near the office so I could work while using crutches. He moved tools, wiped away grinding dust, and found a stool high enough for me to keep my leg extended. That was why I trusted him, not simply because he was my father, but because love and concealment arrived through the same hands. I returned to work far too early because no one else could finish the active bids or close the project files. I thought I was helping the company survive a difficult season. In truth, I was helping it keep moving without ever facing what had happened to me. 5 months after the accident, my leg began to feel wrong in ways I could no longer explain away. It was hot even when the rest of me was cold. The skin around the incisions swelled by afternoon and softened near the top of my shin. A thin line of fluid appeared on the dressing. The pain changed too. It was no longer the sharp pain of healing. It sat deeper, inside the bone, and followed me into sleep. For more than a week, I carried a low fever and told myself I was tired. Dr. Elaine Harper, the orthopedic trauma surgeon who had treated me after the accident, ordered new imaging and blood work. She studied the scans before turning toward me. "The hardware is infected," she said, "and the infection has reached the bone." She explained the plan without softening it. She would reopen the leg, remove damaged tissue and infected hardware, replace the rod, and place me on intravenous antibiotics for 6 weeks. I was not septic that morning, so they did not take me directly into emergency surgery, but Dr. Harper wanted the operation scheduled within 2 weeks. "If the fever climbs, if you start shaking, or if you feel suddenly worse, go to the emergency room," she said. "The longer we wait, the more bone I may have to remove." My health insurer reviewed the authorization and found the original injury had happened at work. They would not approve the second surgery until workers' compensation was identified as the responsible payer. I called the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation from my truck. The representative searched my name, social security number, accident date, employer, and the reference number Dad had given me. She checked twice. There was no claim. The number in my phone belonged to Mercer Steel's internal purchasing system. It was formatted like a legitimate claim number, with letters, dates, and a sequence of digits. I had never questioned it because I had never imagined I needed to verify my own father. While the insurers argued over responsibility, the hospital required $4,600 in estimated patient responsibility to hold the surgery date. That was the amount I had asked my parents to lend me. After they refused, I listed my weekend welding rig for sale: an engine-driven welder, a tandem trailer, welding leads, a cutting outfit, and the job box I had filled piece by piece over 9 years. That rig was more than equipment. It was the back door I kept open in case I ever needed to leave the family shop and still earn a living. A contractor from Canton arrived with cash and a truck strong enough to tow everything away that afternoon. Because I needed immediate payment, I accepted $3,800, far less than the equipment was worth. As he secured the trailer, he looked at my cane. "You know what you're selling, right?" "I know," I said. At the time, I knew I was selling machinery. I did not understand that I was also selling my last practical way to leave my family and support myself. Noah's $800 brought the total to exactly $4,600. The operation happened later than Dr. Harper wanted. Raising the money took time. The insurance dispute remained unresolved. Then the operating room schedule shifted. When she reopened my leg, the infection had spread farther than the scans suggested. She removed more bone than planned. Afterward, my left leg healed slightly shorter than my right. I began wearing a dense foam lift inside my work boot, and Dr. Harper told me I would probably carry a mild limp for the rest of my life. For 6 weeks, I gave myself intravenous antibiotics at home. I still worked. My father called twice weekly to ask about deadlines, but never about the wound. My mother brought soup and a devotional book, then reminded me bitterness could slow healing. Their concern arrived wrapped in correction. Even while I was sick, they treated my endurance as proof that I required nothing from them. From my recliner, I wrote bids, reviewed drawings, prepared material submittals, and answered customers. I told myself the shop needed me. The truth was harder. I believed every successful contract was another deposit in an emotional account my family would eventually recognize. I did not know they had already closed the ledger. Rachel visited once with a casserole. Before leaving, she said gently, "You should have left years ago. Dad was never going to give you the shop." She said it as if I had always known. I had not. I was still on intravenous antibiotics when the insurance email arrived. Sandy, the commercial agent who handled Mercer Steel's renewals, meant to send only the new certificate of insurance. Instead, she attached the entire renewal package. I opened it because reviewing insurance documents was still part of my job. The first pages looked ordinary: coverage limits, vehicle schedules, equipment values. Then came an owner and officer schedule, a business continuation questionnaire, a bank authorization form, and something titled Assignment of Membership Interest. The ownership line read, Noah Mercer, 100%. I read it 3 times. The effective date was June 18th, 3 months after the accident, while I was still using crutches and working from a stool beside the layout bench. The assignment carried Dad's signature, Noah's signature, and a certification from the family attorney. There was more. A bank summary showed a withdrawal from the company's line of credit shortly before the transfer. The amount was almost exactly what my parents had paid for the Airstream. It had been recorded as an owner distribution. Noah had not simply received the company. He had received its debt, its guarantees, and a business whose cash had already been reduced before it reached him. I called him first that morning. He met me behind the shop, where the scrap bins blocked the office windows. When I showed him the documents, the color left his face. Dad said it was succession paperwork, he told me. He said I needed authority to sign checks if something happened to him. He said it would keep the company out of probate. You knew he was preparing you to take over. Yes. You did not know it happened immediately? He looked at the ground. Not at first. That answer mattered. So when did you know? He rubbed both hands over his face. After the bank called me about the credit line. And you said nothing. I did not think it meant you had no share, he said. I thought if you were still here, the company was still both of ours. There are things people can share with words, I said. Ownership is not one of them. Noah had not designed the betrayal, but once he understood it, he accepted the benefit and allowed me to keep working in ignorance. That was his failure. I found Dad in the office. He did not deny the transfer or ask how I had learned about it. Do you think I'm not good enough to run this place? I asked. This was never about whether you were good enough. He said it calmly, which made the answer worse. He told me he had waited until his own father died before the shop became his. A lawyer delivered the papers weeks after the funeral. Dad said he had spent half his life waiting for permission to call the place his own, and he refused to make Noah wait the same way. Mercer Steel carries the family name, he said. A company like this passes to a son. Then what was I all those years? His eyes moved toward the shop floor. You were the best person I ever had in this building. It was praise and a sentence of exclusion at the same time. He saw me as the finest employee he had ever trained, not as the person who might inherit what she had helped preserve. I did not shout. I did not threaten him or demand papers he no longer had the right to give. I carried an empty plastic tote to the wall behind the layout bench. One by one, I removed every Ben test coupon with my name on it and every personal certification tag attached to those samples. I left my grandfather's, I left Dad's. I left every piece belonging to another welder. I took nothing owned by the company. The men nearby stopped working. Most of them did not know the details of the transfer, but they understood that something permanent had happened. Each coupon struck the bottom of the tote with a flat metallic sound. I carried the box to my truck. On the drive home, I passed my parents' house. The Airstream sat beneath a gray cover, unmoved. For the first time, I understood it was not a symbol of freedom. It was something they had purchased so they would not have to look directly at what their freedom had cost someone else. 9 days before the filing deadline, I sat across from Dana Brooks in an office above a pharmacy and learned that I had been waiting for permission. I never needed. Dana handled workers' compensation cases. She wore reading glasses on a chain and kept every file squared with the edge of her desk. "You can file the first report of injury yourself," she said. "Your employer does not control that right." She checked the calendar twice. "You are still within the statute of limitations, but only by 9 days. I asked what would happen to Mercer Steel if I filed. Dana did not answer quickly. "2 safety reports before the accident matter," she said. "If the Bureau audits the company, premiums may rise. They may also examine why the injury was never reported properly. Could it close the shop?" "A truthful claim does not close a healthy business," she said. "But it can expose a business that has survived by postponing consequences." I pictured 14 people punching the same time clock every morning. Some had mortgages, some had children. None of them had decided not to file my claim. I pictured younger welders who trusted the company because my name appeared on its quality records. I was not afraid for myself. I feared that telling the truth would send the damage outward toward people who had done nothing. Dana slid a yellow legal pad toward me. "Memory is a story," she said. "Documents are evidence." She told me to collect everything: the hoist inspection sheets, emails, text messages, photographs of the accident area, medical records, the false reference number, names of witnesses, and proof that I had continued working while receiving treatment. On day 9, I left her office with a list and a fear that felt heavier than my cane. On day 7, I found the first inspection report in an archived safety folder. Dad's handwriting appeared beside my warning, "Repair during next slowdown." On day 5, I found the second report attached to an email I had sent him. He had replied, "Got it. We will handle it after the harbor job." A former employee named Cal agreed to speak with Dana. He remembered hearing Dad say the hoist would be repaired when the shop slowed down. On day 4, I collected my hospital records and printed the purchasing code Dad had given me as a claim number. That evening, Mom called. She did not threaten me. She spoke softly, which made every sentence sound reasonable. "A claim that size will affect the company's insurance," she said. 14 families depend on that shop. Noah has Emily and Maya. You have skills. Lena, you can always start again." "What do I need, Mom?" She said nothing. In that silence, I understood the rule she had followed my entire life. Noah's needs were evidence that he deserved protection. My strength was evidence that I could absorb the loss. On day 3, Noah came to my house and asked me to wait. He said the family could negotiate, reimburse the surgery, and fix the records privately. "Privately is how we got here," I told him. On day 2, I found an envelope outside my door. Inside was $500 in cash. There was no note, but I recognized Dad's block handwriting on the front. The money did not say the accident happened at work. It did not say he had lied. It asked me to accept help without asking him to accept responsibility. On the final day, I logged into the Ohio filing system. I entered the accident date, the hoist defects, the surgery, the infection, the false number, and the names of the people who had seen what happened. My hand stopped over the submit button. I did not feel brave. I felt disloyal. Then I understood that my family had taught me to call self-protection betrayal whenever it cost them something. I pressed submit. It was the first time I had asked for something that belonged to me without preparing an apology. I printed the report and drove it to the shop. Noah read the first page in the parking lot. "Am I going to be in trouble?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. "But I cannot keep carrying the consequences of a record that now has your name on it." Mercer Steel and Stair won the largest contract in its history 3 weeks after my workers' compensation claim was filed. Harbor Line Construction had selected us for a distribution center outside Akron. The contract was worth about $910,000 and covered industrial stairs, guardrails, and mezzanine framing for a shop our size. It was not simply another job. It was the kind of project that could keep 14 people working for most of a year. We won because I had written the estimate, built the material schedule, and prepared the quality package. I was also the certified welding inspector named in the project's quality control plan. Because Mercer had an in-house CWI, we did not have to include the cost and scheduling risk of outside inspection. No one asked whether I intended to stay. The celebration cake arrived, and my mother wrote Mercer Legacy across it in blue icing. Everyone posed for photographs while I stood beside the quality control plan bearing my name. My family had transferred ownership without me, but they still assumed my knowledge, certification, and signature belonged to the company. A week after the award, Dad placed a welder qualification form on my desk. It stated that Noah had completed a test for a new welding process and had passed. "What date was the test?" I asked. Dad leaned against the file cabinet. "You know he can weld. Who witnessed it? You have watched him weld for years. Where is the test plate? Who performed the bend test?" There was no plate, no witness, and no test result. Dad tapped the form with one finger. "It is paperwork. Lena, Noah has better hands than half the men you have certified." "A signature does not prove he knows how to weld," I said. "It proves I witnessed something that never happened." I pushed the form back. I refused to sign. At Sunday dinner, Mom said I was making the shop vulnerable over a technicality. Rachel said I could be correct without making everyone else pay for it. Noah barely spoke. Dad discussed the Harbor Line schedule as though the unsigned form were already behind us. That night, I wrote my resignation letter. I gave 30 days' notice. Before leaving, I prepared a complete transition package. It listed every active welding procedure specification, every welder qualification record, the gaps in the continuity logs, the people who needed retesting, Harbor Line's requirement for an approved replacement CWI, all pending submittals, and 2 written quotations from outside inspection companies. I handed the packet to Dad and Noah together. Dad folded it once without reading it. "I ran this shop before people turned everything into paperwork," he said. I also wrote directly to Ethan Briggs, Harbor Line's quality manager. I told him the exact date I would stop serving as Mercer Steel's quality representative. I stated that no inspection record produced after that date could carry my signature or inspector number, and that Mercer would need to submit a replacement CWI for approval. Ethan replied within 15 minutes. Please provide the name and credentials of the replacement inspector before further code work proceeds. Dad called the message an overreaction. He believed production could continue and the records could be completed later. I completed my notice period, labeled every file, and left every company document in place. Then I rented a narrow warehouse bay with a leaking roof and named the business Northline Metalworks. I no longer owned the weekend rig. I had spent 9 years building. I had sold it to pay for surgery. To begin again, I financed a welding machine, borrowed a plasma cutter, bought an old bandsaw at auction, and accepted small repair jobs. Other shops did not want. I fixed loose stair rails, replaced rusted landings, and built short runs of guardrail. Every morning, before pulling on my left boot, I adjusted the foam lift beneath my heel. Without it, my hip tilted and my back tightened before noon. Even with it, I walked with a slight limp. 2 weeks after I left Mercer, Cal, one of the senior fabricators, called me. He could not understand which qualification record applied to a set of Harborline drawings. For several seconds, I almost told him I would drive over. Then I looked at the lift inside my boot. My body had already paid for the last time I rescued that company from the consequences of its own decisions. I opened my copy of the transition package and explained exactly where the answer was written. I did not return to do the work for them. After I left, Mercer Steel kept producing the Harborline package. No one rebuilt the quality system around my absence. They simply removed my name from the forms and continued as if the rest of the process would hold itself together. A revised shop drawing changed the thickness of several mezzanine connections. The old welding procedure specification remained at the workstations. Because the material was thicker, the required preheat temperature should have increased, but no one updated the document. There was no replacement certified welding inspector checking fit-up or confirming temperature before welding began. Noah's continuity record for the process was incomplete. The schedule was already slipping, so Dad added another shift and told the crew to keep material moving. Final inspection boxes remained blank. Noah was not an incompetent welder. His hands were steady, and he could make a clean bead under difficult conditions. But he welded from the procedure placed beside his station, and that procedure was wrong for the revised connection. Skill could not repair a system that had stopped checking itself. At the Akron site, an erection crew lifted a section of mezzanine framing into position. 2 ironworkers were standing on the temporary platform while the connection was being aligned. A crack opened near one of the welded joints. The connection lost its ability to carry the temporary load. The platform shifted and dropped. One worker caught a handrail post. Luis Ortega did not. He fell to the concrete below. Luis survived, but his pelvis broke in multiple places. He underwent more than one surgery and would be unable to return to full work for months. I heard about the accident from a fabricator I knew in Canton. My first feeling was not satisfaction. I did not think. I warned them. I sat in my truck with the engine off and tried to remember every line of the transition package. Which connections had I identified? Had I listed the revised drawing? Had I explained the continuity gap clearly enough? Was there a procedure I had forgotten? Being correct in principle did not remove the possibility that I had missed something. It did not quiet the shame of knowing that a man had fallen inside a system I once helped maintain. Ethan Briggs called the next afternoon. He said the engineer of record had ordered a stop to the affected work. OSHA was reviewing erection conditions and safety records. Harborline had begun examining Mercer Steel's quality file. "The last inspection documents with a valid signature are yours," Ethan said. "Everything after your departure has an empty inspection box." He did not ask me to backdate anything. He did not ask me to protect Harborline or punish Mercer. He asked me to provide my records, confirm my final date of employment, and answer questions about how the quality system had operated before I left. Then he said, "You are the only person in this file who wrote down the problem before it became an accident." The words did not feel like praise. They felt like weight. I went to the hospital that evening and sat in the parking lot for nearly an hour. I had brought a card for Luis and a folder containing Dana's contact information, but I could not make myself walk inside. Sofia Ortega came out through the sliding doors and recognized the Mercer name on the envelope. She told me she did not want anyone connected to the company near her husband. I said I understood and handed her the folder. Several weeks later, Luis agreed to see me. He looked smaller in the hospital bed than he had in the photograph attached to the accident report. Metal supports held his pelvis stable beneath the sheets. His wife sat near the window with her arms folded. "I heard you warned them," he said. "I warned them the records were not right," I answered. "I did not know who would end up paying for it." Luis looked at the cane beside my chair, then at the way my left boot rested differently on the floor. "Now you know," he said. There was no immediate forgiveness in the room. I had not come expecting it. There were only two injured people sitting across from each other, both finally understanding the price of a system that kept postponing responsibility until someone else's body was forced to carry it. Dad came to my house for the first time since the night he refused to help pay for my surgery. Mom sat beside him in the truck, and Noah stood near the tailgate with both hands in his jacket pockets. Dad carried 2 document folders beneath one arm. He did not ask to come inside. We stood in my driveway under the yellow light above the garage. The gravel was damp from an afternoon rain, and every time I shifted my weight, the lift inside my left boot pressed against my heel. Dad placed the first folder on the tailgate. Inside was a signed assignment of membership interest. Noah had already transferred his ownership in Mercer Steel and Stair to me. A second agreement stated that my parents would place the shop building and surrounding land into escrow. If the bank approved the change in personal guarantees, I would become the legal owner of the company, the property, and everything attached to them. It was not a promise. The signatures were there, the lawyer's certification was there. Even the bank contact information was clipped to the final page. Everything I had once wanted lay inside that folder. Dad opened the second one. The first document stated that Noah had been properly qualified for the welding process used on the Harborline connections at the time the work was performed. The second certified that his continuity log had been maintained throughout the project. Neither statement was true. Both documents had dates from before the accident. "The welds may still be sound," Dad said. "This is a record problem." "A piece of paper never held up a beam," he said. "Noah knows how to weld. You know that better than anyone. We are not asking you to invent skill. We are asking you to confirm what everyone in that shop already knows is true." He spoke quickly, as though speed could keep the words from becoming what they were. "If you sign, Harborline may keep us on the project. 14 families may keep their paychecks. Your grandfather's shop may survive." Mom stepped closer. "You have always said you care about the people who work there," she said. "This is when you prove it." She did not call the documents false. She described them as sacrifice, as though dishonesty became honorable when enough frightened people depended on it. Dad tapped the first folder. "Tomorrow, the company could be yours, The building, the land, the name, everything you ever wanted, for one moment. I saw the life I had spent 20 years imagining. My office, my decisions, my name on the bank documents instead of someone else's. The wall of test coupons restored behind the layout bench. Then I looked at Noah. He had not lifted his eyes from the gravel. "I benefited when they cut you out," he said. After I understood what the papers meant, I still did not give the company back. Dad turned toward him, but Noah continued. "I told myself you would stay. I thought you would keep running the shop and we would both benefit. Even if my name was on everything." He finally looked at me. "I did not take it out of your hands, but when I learned it had been placed in mine, I did not return it. I understand now those two things are not as different as I wanted them to be." Dad removed a pen from his shirt pocket and laid it across the backdated forms. Noah spoke before I could reach for it. "Don't sign, Lena." The driveway went silent. It was the first time my brother had openly opposed our father, not in private, not through a warning or an apology. He had chosen a side where Dad could hear him. I told them I needed one night. Dad agreed because he believed wanting the company would eventually outweigh everything else. After they left, I carried both folders into my kitchen. I did not intend to review the company's entire technical history. I only wanted to verify Noah's qualification date before I gave Dad my answer. But I had never known how to begin an inspection in the middle. I opened the oldest records first, and there, beneath a procedure I had not examined in years, I found my own signature. The signature belonged to a welding procedure specification I had written in 2023. At first, I assumed the problem was in the copy. Then I checked the original table. The material thickness listed on the project drawings exceeded the range I had verified. The preheat temperature on my procedure was lower than the code required for that steel. No second reviewer had signed beneath me. My name was there alone. I remembered the week clearly. Mercer Steel had 3 projects moving at once. Dad was pressuring me to release material before the weekend. I was estimating one job, reviewing another, and answering inspection questions from the floor. I had used an older reference table and told myself I would confirm it later. Later never came. The procedure had passed through the shop because everyone trusted that I would catch every error. I had allowed that trust to replace review. The system that treated me as indispensable had made my exhaustion invisible, and I had signed beneath that exhaustion as though competence made me incapable of being wrong. I had not made the mistake because I lacked training. I had made it because I believed the shop could not afford for me to slow down. 3 buildings might have received steel produced under that procedure. One was a school where Northline Metalworks had just won a major guardrail contract. If I reported the error, the school could suspend my work. I could lose the money already spent on material. My young company could be marked as a quality risk. The one employee I had finally hired might lose his job. I sat at my kitchen table until after midnight, building arguments for silence. The error was 3 years old. There was no proof any connection had failed. The current investigation concerned Mercer, not Northline. I could place my mistake in an appendix. I could finish the school contract first. Each excuse sounded reasonable until I heard my father's voice saying the harbor line problem was only paperwork. If I hid my mistake to protect my company, I would become him with a different name on the door. I opened a new document and titled it Non-Conformance Report. Item 1 identified the 2023 procedure I had written and approved. I listed the incorrect material range, the inadequate preheat temperature, my signature, the affected production records, and the 3 projects that might contain the work. I recommended that each engineer of record retain an independent, non-destructive testing specialist to develop an appropriate examination plan. Item 2 addressed Harbor Line. I listed the missing qualification documentation, the incomplete continuity record, the absence of an approved replacement CWI, the outdated WPS, and the blank inspection records. Then I signed the report. The next morning, I delivered it to Ethan Briggs at Harborline's site office. He read Item 1 twice. "Do you understand what this could do to Northline?" he asked. "Yes. You could have placed it later in the report." "If it does not come first," I said, "the rest of this report has no value." Ethan closed the folder carefully. 9 minutes later, Dad entered the trailer. Noah had told him where I was. Dad read the first page and began shouting. He said I had endangered the family home, destroyed my grandfather's name, and handed Harborline a weapon against both companies. Then he pulled my transition package from the glove compartment of his truck. It was still folded exactly as I had given it to him. The pages were clean, the corners were sharp. He had never studied them. "You never read it," I said. "I knew what was in it." "No, you knew I would keep carrying it for you." He pushed the backdated forms toward me again. "You can still fix this." I looked at my signature on the report, then at the empty lines he wanted me to fill. "You wanted my signature when it could protect you," I said, "but you never wanted my name when it could protect me." Dad stared at me as if I had changed the rules. I had not. For the first time, I was applying them to everyone. Including myself, I left both false documents unsigned. Mercer Steel and Stair did not collapse because of one report. Ohio Workers' Compensation accepted my claim, reimbursed the eligible medical expenses, and opened an audit into why the injury had never been filed correctly. The company's premiums rose sharply. OSHA did not cite Mercer for the welding procedure itself. It examined the way my injury had been recorded, the missing record-keeping, unsafe lifting conditions, and the erection practices surrounding Luis's fall. Harborline and the engineer of record stopped the work, ordered independent testing, required defective connections to be removed and repaired, terminated Mercer's contract, and backcharged the company for the cost. Then the insurer restricted coverage. The surety reduced Mercer's bonding capacity. The bank tightened the line of credit. Without bonding, the shop could no longer pursue the large projects that kept 14 people employed. Mercer Steel closed because years of postponed responsibility finally arrived in the same investigation. There was no satisfaction in watching the doors close, only grief for damage that honesty had revealed too late. That truth did not make the consequences painless. Several innocent employees lost their jobs. I wrote recommendation letters, called other shops, and helped them find interviews. When Northline could afford another employee, I hired Cal. I refused to buy Mercer's equipment at the liquidation auction. Even when some machines sold below market value, I did not want my new company built from the cheapest pieces of my family's ruin. Luis recovered slowly and returned to light duty. We never became close friends. Some injuries do not create friendship, they create understanding months later. He accepted my apology, though he never pretended an apology could return the time his family had lost. The Airstream was sold to help cover legal expenses. It had never left my parents' yard. Noah found work at another fabrication shop. He tested for the same welding process at an independent certification center and passed on his first plate. His skill had never been the whole problem. Skill could not replace honest records, independent review, or a system willing to stop when something was wrong. He texted me a photograph of his qualification card. "You earned that." I replied, "Keep it." Northline's school contract was suspended while the older steel was examined. Most connections passed. Several required repair. I lost material costs, weeks of work, and money my young company could not easily spare. I did not lose my career. 2 contractors contacted me after reading the non-conformance report. They had noticed that I placed my own mistake first. Northline grew slowly, without dramatic victories. We paid our bills, earned repeat work, and built a reputation that belonged to the people standing behind it. I used part of the reimbursed medical money to create an emergency treatment fund for employees. We established an independent accident reporting process. Every important technical document required a second review, including mine. One Saturday, Noah brought Maya to visit. She stood beneath the bend test coupons I had mounted on Northline's wall and asked, "When do I get to take the test?" I did not promise her the company. "When you are old enough, skilled enough, and understand what the signature beneath the card means," I said. I handed her a cooled piece of test steel with the edges cleaned smooth. I explained that if the coupon bent without opening, it passed. If it cracked apart, it failed. It did not matter whose child had made it. "Even if I am family?" she asked. "Especially if you are family." I spent almost 20 years trying to prove I deserved to inherit a company. In the end, I understood that a company was not a reward for my worth. My worth lived in the signatures I was still willing to claim when everything around them began to fall. If you have ever been the person who always manages until your family forgets you also need protection, share your story in the comments. Send this to someone carrying a family that has never written down their name, and subscribe for more stories where justice does not come from revenge, but from one person finally telling the truth.